They mocked his trembling hands. They thought he was weak. But when the lights went out, the hijackers learned the terrifying truth. He wasn't shaking from fear. He was holding back the beast. The fluorescent lights of the New York City subway car flickered with a sickly yellow hum, casting long, jittery shadows across the graffiti-scarred seats. It was 2 a.m. on the R line, a desolate stretch of track running deep beneath the city's concrete roots. Arthur, a man whose uniform hung loosely on his gaunt frame, moved down the aisle with a slow, deliberate shuffle. He was the kind of invisible fixture New Yorkers were trained to ignore. Gray hair, thick spectacles, and hands that seemed to vibrate with a constant, low-frequency tremor. "Ticket, please," Arthur mumbled, his voice rasping like dry leaves over pavement. He stopped in front of a trio of Wall Street brokers, their suits costing more than Arthur made in a decade. They were loud, drunk on expensive scotch and their own inflated sense of self-worth. The leader, a slick-haired man named Brad, didn't even look up from his phone. "Beat it, Pops. We swiped in. Go bother the rats." Arthur stood his ground, his hand extending slightly. The tremor in his fingers was visible now. "I need to verify, sir. Scanners down at the turnstile. Just doing my job." Brad looked up, a sneer curling his lip. He reached out and shoved Arthur's shoulder. The old man stumbled back, catching himself on a metal pole, his knuckles turning white. "I said beat it," Brad laughed, turning to his friends. "Look at him shaking. Guy's terrified of his own shadow. Probably wet himself already." The train car erupted in cruel laughter. Passengers looked away, burying their faces in books or phones, avoiding eye contact. No one stood up for the old ticket inspector. Arthur didn't retaliate. He didn't shout. He simply adjusted his cap, lowered his head, and stared at his hands. To the outside world, those hands looked like they were trembling from palsy or fear. But inside Arthur's mind, the context was different. That shaking was the idle engine of a lethal machine. It was the suppression of a reflex honed 40 years ago in the humid, claustrophobic darkness of Vietnam. Every muscle in his body wanted to snap Brad's wrist, but Arthur breathed in through his nose, forcing the tunnel rat back into its cage. He was just a ticket taker now. Just a ghost in the system. "Have a safe evening," Arthur whispered, moving to the next car as the train gathered speed, the rhythmic clack-clack of the wheels acting as a heartbeat for the city. He retreated to the conductor's booth at the rear, seeking the solitude of the dark window. He watched the tunnel lights zip by. Red, green, darkness. He knew every bolt, every switch, and every alcove of the sector. He didn't know it yet, but that knowledge was about to become the only currency that mattered. The train was screaming through the express tunnel, bypassing the local stops, when the rhythm changed. It wasn't a gradual deceleration. It was a violent, jarring lurch that sent standing passengers sprawling across the linoleum floor. The screech of metal on metal was deafening, a high-pitched banshee wail that pierced the ears. Then, absolute silence. The momentum died instantly. The sickly yellow fluorescent lights buzzed once, twice, and then popped, plunging the entire train into an abyssal darkness. For a moment, there was only the sound of confused murmurs and the heavy, settling groans of the train's suspension. Then, the emergency red mood lighting kicked in, bathing the subway car in a blood-colored glow. "Hey! What the hell is going on?" Brad shouted from the front car, his bravado cracking slightly. "I'm losing signal down here." Suddenly, the hydraulic hiss of the connecting doors engaging manually echoed through the quiet. But it wasn't the conductor. 3 figures moved into the car with practiced fluidity. They wore tactical black fatigues, heavy body armor, and gas masks that hid their faces completely. In their hands, they held suppressed submachine guns, military grade. This wasn't a robbery. This was a seizure. Heads down. Phones on the floor. "Now!" The lead mercenary barked. His voice was distorted by the mask, robotic and terrifying. Panic erupted. A woman screamed. A teenager tried to scramble under a seat. The mercenary raised his weapon and fired a warning shot into the ceiling. The thwip crack of the bullet tearing through the metal roof silenced the car instantly. "The next one goes in a kneecap," the leader growled. "This train is under new management. Nobody leaves until we get what we came for. Up in the conductor's booth, the actual driver, a young man named Steve, was hyperventilating. He was frantically mashing the radio button. Control. Control. We have a situation 10. Hijack. Send police. Open the door, Steve. A calm voice came from behind him. Steve spun around. It was Arthur. But Arthur wasn't shaking anymore. He was standing perfectly still in the red gloom, his posture erect, his eyes scanning the monitors that showed the grainy feed of the passengers being corralled. They cut the radio lines before they killed the power, Steve, Arthur said, his voice dropping an octave, losing the rasp. It was smooth, cold granite. They jammed the emergency brakes from the outside. These aren't punks. They're pros. What do? We have to surrender, Steve cried, reaching for the door handle to the passenger car. Arthur's hand shot out, clamping onto Steve's wrist with a grip like a vice. It was fast. Blur fast. You go out there, you're a liability. They'll kill you just to make a point. Sit down. Lock this door. Turn off the monitors. Who are you? Steve stammered, looking at the old man he'd ignored for years. I'm the guy who checks the tickets, Arthur said softly. And I think these gentlemen forgot to pay. The atmosphere inside the train cars had shifted from confusion to primal terror. The mercenaries, a squad of 6 highly trained operators, moved with clinical efficiency. They weren't interested in wallets or watches. They were moving car to car, checking faces against a digital tablet. They were looking for someone specific. In the rear car, Arthur watched through the sliver of the reinforced glass window of the conductor's booth. He counted them. 6 hostiles. Standard formation. 2 guarding the doors, 2 sweeping the passengers, 2 securing the perimeter. They carried Heckler and Koch MP5s. Compact, reliable. They moved like water. No wasted energy. They're sweeping for a target, Arthur muttered to himself, his eyes narrowing behind his thick spectacles. High-value extraction or an assassination. Arthur, please. Steve whimpered from the corner, curled into a ball. Just stay here. The police will come. The police are 20 minutes out, Steve. And even when they get here, they can't breach the tunnel without risking a derailment or a hostage execution. We are in Sector 4. The ventilation shafts here are too narrow for a SWAT drop. We're on our own. Arthur reached into his pocket. He didn't pull out a weapon. He pulled out a heavy steel ticket puncher, the old-school kind, shaped like a pair of pliers but made of solid iron. He also pulled out a small roll of electrical tape and a lighter. What are you doing? Steve asked, watching Arthur wrap the tape around his knuckles, securing the steel puncher into his grip like a makeshift knuckle duster. I'm going to work, Arthur said. He turned to the maintenance panel on the wall of the booth. With a few quick turns of a screwdriver he kept on his belt, he popped the panel open. Behind it lay the train's nerve center. Wires, fuses, and hydraulic lines. Arthur didn't cut the lights. He cut the air. He located the fuse for the HVAC circulation fans in the rear 3 cars. With a spark and a snap, he killed the ventilation. Why did you do that? Steve whispered. Sound, Arthur replied, taking off his heavy uniform jacket to reveal a stained white undershirt and arms that, while thin, were roped with sinewy muscle. The fans create white noise. I need silence. In the tunnels, sound is your radar. If you can hear them breathing, you can kill them. He looked at Steve one last time. Lock this door behind me. Do not open it for anyone but me. If you hear shooting, stay down. If you hear nothing, well, pray. Arthur manually disengaged the rear emergency exit of the train. The heavy door slid open, revealing the pitch-black maw of the subway tunnel. The smell hit him instantly. Ozone, stagnant water, rat droppings, and rust. To anyone else, it was the smell of fear. To Arthur, it smelled like 1968. It smelled like home. He slipped out of the train car and onto the narrow maintenance walkway of the tunnel, disappearing into the shadows like ink dropped into water. Arthur pressed his back against the cold, damp concrete of the tunnel wall. The train was a long, glowing serpent of red light in the center of the track, but out here in the maintenance crawlspace, it was absolute obsidian darkness. This was the shift. The moment the prey became the predator. He closed his eyes. He didn't need them yet. He needed to calibrate his senses. He felt the air currents shifting from the movement of the mercenaries inside the train. He felt the vibration of their boots on the metal floorboards reverberating through the track ties. Physics, Arthur thought. Distance, velocity, torque. He was currently positioned at the rear of the train. The mercenaries were working their way back. The leader was in the third car. The rearguard, the scout, was likely stationed at the connection between the last two cars to prevent a rear ambush. Arthur moved. He didn't walk. He flowed. He crouched low, his center of gravity mere inches from the ground. This was the duck walk, a movement technique burned into his muscle memory from crawling through Viet Cong tunnels that were barely 2 feet wide. No sound. No scuffing of boots. Just a ghost gliding over the trash and debris of the subway floor. He reached the gap between the last two cars. The accordion-like rubber connector groaned as the train settled. Through the gap, he could see the boots of a mercenary standing guard on the platform between cars. The man was relaxed, his weapon slung low, confident that no one was crazy enough to be outside the train in the electrified tunnel. Arthur analyzed the environment. The third rail, running 600 volts of direct current, was humming aggressively just 3 feet away. One touch and you were ash. But Arthur respected the rail. He didn't fear it. He knew the layout of the insulators. He picked up a loose metal bolt from the track bed. He weighed it in his hand. He needed a distraction, but not a loud one. Just enough to make the scout turn his head. Arthur tossed the bolt. It didn't hit the train. It hit the concrete wall on the opposite side of the track, 30 feet away. Clink. The mercenary's head snapped toward the sound. "Hello," the guard whispered, raising his flashlight toward the tunnel wall. That split second of distraction was the window. Arthur didn't lunge. He uncoiled. He vaulted from the darkness of the maintenance path, leaping silently across the gap between the cars. He landed on the coupling mechanism, right behind the guard. The guard sensed the movement and began to turn, his mouth opening to shout. But Arthur was already there. He wasn't a frail old man anymore. He was a force of nature. Silence was the priority. A gunshot would alert the squad. A scream would cause panic. It had to be intimate. Arthur's left hand, surprisingly strong, clamped over the mercenary's gas mask, covering the voice diaphragm. At the same time, his right hand, the one gripping the heavy steel ticket puncher, swung in a tight, vicious arc. He didn't aim for the helmet. He aimed for the soft spot just below the ear, where the armor met the neck. Thud. It was a wet, heavy sound, muffled by the ambient hum of the tunnel. The steel puncher connected with the mercenary's vagus nerve and carotid artery. The man's knees buckled instantly. The lights went out in his eyes before he hit the floor. Arthur caught him. He bore the weight of the 200-pound soldier and the tactical gear, lowering him gently onto the metal coupling platform. There was no shaking in Arthur's hands now. They were steady as stone. He quickly stripped the mercenary of his radio and a combat knife. He checked the pulse. Gone. One down, Arthur whispered. He dragged the body off the train and rolled it into the dark recess of a drainage ditch along the tunnel wall. Then, he looked at the weapon the man had dropped. A sleek, suppressed MP5. Arthur picked it up, checked the chamber, and then he put it down. Too loud, he decided. Too messy. He preferred his tools. He looked at the ticket puncher, now stained with a dark smear. It was effective, but he needed more reach. He scanned the maintenance alcove nearby and saw it, a heavy-duty breaker bar used for track repairs, about 2 feet of solid hardened steel. He grabbed the bar. He tapped his earpiece. He had taken the mercenary's comms unit and inserted it into his own ear. "Check in, Echo 4, the leader's voice crackled in the earpiece. "Status on the rear?" Arthur waited. He knew the protocol. Silence was suspicious, but panic was worse. "Echo 4, respond," the voice demanded, tighter this time. Arthur keyed the mic for a fraction of a second, just enough to transmit a burst of static and a heavy, ragged breath. Then he cut it. He climbed back onto the train, not through the door, but up onto the roof. The clearance between the train roof and the tunnel ceiling was less than 2 feet. It was suicide for a normal man. For a tunnel rat, it was a highway. He lay flat on his stomach, the metal cold against his chest, and began to crawl forward toward the next car. Inside the train, the atmosphere had tightened like a noose. The leader, a towering man with a scar running through his eyebrow visible even behind his mask, tapped his headset furiously. Echo 4 is dark, he hissed to his second in command. Something's wrong. Miller, take Rodriguez and sweep the rear. Someone's playing hero. 2 mercenaries broke off from the main group, moving tactically toward the back of the train. They were edgy now. They swept their laser sights across the terrified passengers, shouting for heads to stay down. If anyone moves, they bleed. Miller shouted. Up on the roof, Arthur felt the vibrations of their boots. He was directly above them. He could see through the emergency ventilation hatch, a small square grate that opened slightly for airflow. He watched them pass beneath him. He waited until they reached the empty rear car where he had killed the first guard. Clear, Miller reported. Wait. The door is open. Echo 4 is gone. Gone. The leader's voice crackled. What do you mean, gone? I mean he's not here, boss. No blood. No gear. Just gone. Arthur smiled grimly in the darkness. Psychological warfare was just as deadly as a bullet. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a handful of old subway tokens. Heavy brass coins from the 90s he kept as lucky charms. He crawled forward to the hatch above the car where the leader and the hostages were. He carefully unscrewed the grate. Below him, Brad, the arrogant banker, was sobbing quietly, held at gunpoint. Arthur dropped a single token. Cling. It hit the floor in the dead center of the silent car. The sound was impossibly loud. The leader spun around, weapon raised. Who threw that? Another token. Cling. Then Arthur leaned close to the open hatch and whispered. He didn't whisper like an old man. He projected his voice, throwing it so it seemed to come from the walls themselves. Ticket check. The leader fired a burst into the ceiling, missing Arthur by inches. Up top. He's on the roof. Panic exploded. The mercenaries started firing blindly into the ceiling metal. Bullets punched through, jagged holes of light appearing in the roof. Arthur rolled, pressing himself into the drainage gutter of the train roof, the bullets whizzing past him. You're in my tunnel now, Arthur thought. He scrambled forward, toward the front of the train. He needed to get to the engine car. He needed to execute the maneuver. The leader was screaming orders. Kill him. Kill the hostages if he doesn't show himself. Wrong move, Arthur growled. He reached the gap between the second and first car. He swung down, smashing the glass of the side window with his breaker bar, and dove inside the empty engineer's cabin of the second car. He was inside. And he was angry. Arthur was in the cab of the second car. It wasn't the master control, but it had access to the emergency braking and coupling systems. The train was dead in the water, but the track was alive. The mercenaries were advancing from the rear cars, pushing the hostages ahead of them as human shields. They were smart. They knew Arthur wouldn't shoot through civilians. Come out, old man. The leader shouted. Or the suit gets it. He pressed his gun against Brad's temple. Arthur looked at the control panel. He looked at the track schematics on the wall. They were parked on a gradient, a slight incline. And just ahead, 50 yards down the tunnel, was a switch track that led to the old abandoned spur line, the Ghost Loop. Arthur knew that the spur line had a sharp, violent curve designed for slow-moving cargo trains, not passenger cars. If the train hit that curve with any momentum, the G-force would be enough to knock everyone off their feet. But the train was stopped. Unless... Arthur looked at the gravity brake. If he released the pneumatic pressure on the rear cars but kept the front locked, the tension would snap. But that wasn't enough. He needed power. He ripped open the floor panel, exposing the high-voltage leads. He grabbed the breaker bar. He was about to do something incredibly stupid. He was going to bridge the connection between the train's battery backup and the traction motors, bypassing the safety regulators. It would give the train a massive momentary jolt of torque, a kick. "Hold on," Arthur whispered to the empty air. He jammed the steel bar across the terminals. Boom! A shower of sparks exploded in the cab, singing Arthur's eyebrows. The train groaned and then, violently, lurched backward, not forward. The sudden reversal of torque sent a shockwave through the chassis. In the passenger car, the mercenaries, braced for a forward assault or standing still, were thrown off balance. The hostages, already sitting or cowering, were safer. The standing gunmen were tossed like ragdolls. The leader slammed into a support pole, losing his grip on Brad. The light surged blindingly bright for 1 second, then blew out completely, plunging the car into total, suffocating darkness again. Arthur didn't wait. The moment the train lurched, he was moving. He burst from the second car into the main passenger car. He didn't need light. He had the map in his head. Target 1, left aisle, 3 meters. Target 2, right door, 5 meters. He moved through the chaos, a whirlwind of elbows, knees, and the steel breaker bar. He swept the legs of the first mercenary, hearing the bones snap. He drove the bar into the solar plexus of the second. They couldn't see him. They fired wildly, flashes of muzzle flare illuminating brief, horrific snapshots of the fight. Arthur, face streaked with soot, eyes wide and focused, moving with the terrifying speed of a man who had survived the jungle. The chaos in the car was absolute. The sudden lurch and the darkness had turned the tactical squad into panicked amateurs. But the leader was a professional. He had lost his night vision goggles in the fall, but he had a thermal scope on his rifle. He saw the heat signature, a glowing red form moving through his men like a scythe through wheat. "I see you," the leader roared, raising his rifle. Arthur saw the green laser sweep across his chest. He dove behind a row of metal seats just as the bullets shredded the upholstery. He was pinned. The breaker bar was heavy, slow. He needed to close the distance. "You're good, old man," the leader taunted, stalking forward, the heat signature guiding him. "But you're tired. I can hear your heart rate. It's spiking." Arthur lay on the floor, breathing rhythmically. In, out. He wasn't tired. He was charging. He reached into his boot and pulled out a small glass bottle, cleaning solvent he used for removing graffiti. He pulled out his lighter. "Fire in the hole," Arthur whispered. He flicked the lighter and tossed the bottle, not at the leader, but at the ceiling, directly into the shattered remains of the light fixture where the electrical wires were still sparking from the surge. The solvent hit the sparks. Whoosh! A fireball erupted in the ceiling, raining down burning liquid. It wasn't enough to kill, but the sudden flare of intense heat blinded the thermal scope. The leader shouted, ripping the useless goggles from his face. For 3 seconds, the car was illuminated by the fire. In that flickering orange light, the leader saw Arthur. He wasn't hiding anymore. He was standing on top of the seats, 5 feet away. Arthur launched himself. It was a desperate, gravity-defying leap. The leader raised his rifle, but Arthur batted the barrel aside with his left hand, the hot metal searing his palm. They crashed to the floor. The rifle skittered away. It was hand-to-hand now. The leader was younger, stronger, heavier. He drove a fist into Arthur's ribs, and Arthur felt something crack. The pain was blinding. But pain was just information. Arthur twisted, using his smaller frame to slip out of the hold. He didn't try to punch the man. He went for the joints. He locked his legs around the leader's arm, applying a jiu-jitsu armbar he'd learned from a heavyweight Marine in '69. The leader howled and reached for his boot knife. Arthur saw the glint of the blade. He released the lock and rolled, grabbing the leader's wrist. They struggled, the knife inching toward Arthur's throat. The leader grinned, blood in his teeth. "Die, old man." Arthur looked him in the eye. The trembling in his hands was gone completely. Tickets expired. Arthur didn't push the knife away. He pulled the leader's weight forward, using the man's own momentum, and drove his knee up into the man's chin. The snap was audible. The leader's head whipped back, and his body went limp. Arthur shoved him off, gasping for air, clutching his broken ribs. He stood up, swaying. The other mercenaries were groaning on the floor, disabled or unconscious. The passengers stared at him in stunned silence. Brad, the banker, looked up at the bloodied, soot-covered old man he had mocked. He was shaking, terrified. Who are you?" Brad whispered. Arthur picked up his fallen cap, dusted it off, and placed it on his head. "I told you. Ticket inspector." The tunnel lights flickered back on, the emergency generators finally kicking in. The train sat motionless, a smoking, battered metal tube in the heart of the underground. Sirens wailed in the distance, getting louder. The police had finally decided to breach. "Everyone stay down," Arthur commanded, his voice raspy again. He walked over to the intercom, which had miraculously started working with the power return. "Steve? You there? Arthur? Oh my God, Arthur. Are you alive? Yeah. Open the doors. The cavalry is here." The tunnel flooded with light as a SWAT team advanced, shields up, rifles trained on the train. "Police. Show us your hands." Arthur stepped out of the broken door, his hands raised. For a second, the snipers targeted him, a disheveled figure covered in blood. "Don't shoot," Brad screamed, running to the door. "He saved us. He saved everyone." The SWAT commander lowered his weapon. He signaled his team to move in. They swept the cars, zip-tying the unconscious mercenaries. The paramedics rushed past Arthur to check the hostages. Arthur leaned against a graffiti-covered pillar, lighting a cigarette with trembling hands. The adrenaline was fading, and the ghost was retreating. The old man was back. The police chief, a grizzled veteran named O'Malley, walked over. He looked at the unconscious mercenaries, highly trained killers taken apart with surgical precision. He looked at the improvised traps, the shattered lights, the tactical dismantling of a superior force. He looked at Arthur. He saw the tunnel rat patch faded on an old wallet Arthur was holding. O'Malley didn't ask questions. He didn't ask for a statement. He simply stood tall and offered a sharp, respectful salute. "Nice work, soldier," O'Malley said quietly. Arthur didn't salute back. He just nodded, took a drag of his cigarette, and exhaled a long plume of smoke. "Just keep the rats off my train, Chief." The news crews descended like vultures. Helicopters circled the station entrance above ground. Reporters shoved microphones into the faces of the traumatized but safe passengers. "He was a hero," Brad was saying to a camera, humbled and shaken. "He was like a ninja. An old guy, a ticket taker. I want to find him. I want to give him a reward. Where is he?" The camera panned around the chaotic scene. The paramedics, the police, the crying families reunited. But Arthur was gone. He had slipped away during the confusion, blending into the crowd of onlookers, just another gray face in a sea of people. He walked down the block, his limp returning, his hands thrust deep into his pockets to hide the tremors. He wasn't interested in medals. He wasn't interested in interviews. He had done his job. The tunnel was safe. As he descended the stairs into a different subway station to catch the ride home, the voiceover returns, low, gravelly, and respectful. "We walk past them every day. The invisible ones. The ones we mock, the ones we ignore. We mistake their silence for weakness. We mistake their age for frailty. But remember this, the most dangerous thing in the dark isn't the monster. It's the man who hunts it. Next time you see an old man shaking on the subway, show some respect. You never know who's watching over you."